Sunera Tobani. Sunera is the Associate Professor at the Institute for Gender, Race, Sexuality, and Social Justice at UBC. Her research focuses on critical race, post-colonial and feminist theory, globalization and violence, citizenship, migration, Muslim women, the war on terror, and media. Please join me in welcoming Sunera.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by thanking Rabble for organizing this event. I would also like to thank all the volunteers who must have worked really hard to pull this together. I'd like to thank the moderator and, of course, all of my co-presenters and all of you for coming here this evening. I'd like to begin also by acknowledging that we are on unceded Musqueam and Coast Salish territories, that we live on stolen lands. This acknowledgement is also an expression of support for indigenous struggles for sovereignty, a point that has been made by everybody on this panel. If anybody knows the effects of war and occupation, of the relationship between racial hatred, genocide, and the stealing of resources, it is indigenous peoples in Canada and the world over. They have been living with and struggling against such violence for centuries, and I think it's therefore very important that the struggles against Islamophobia be also committed to and linked with the struggles of indigenous peoples against their ongoing colonization. Given the very excellent presentations that my co-presenters have already made, I will make my comments very brief, and the comments that I'm making are based on a research that I'm doing for a book that I'm currently working on. So I'll make three very brief points. My first point will be that how we define Islamophobia is very, very important, and not the least for discussing how we go about challenging this highly destructive discourse. My second point is that the role of the media in disseminating Islamophobic constructs and discourses is certainly very important, but we have to highlight how these media representations are connected to the larger political practices and forms of governance that give these media constructs the power that they have come to acquire. And my third point is that in discussing how to counter Islamophobia and its effects, it is crucial to engage with and learn from and also build alliances with the Muslim communities that are its primary targets. Now, some of these points have already been made. I'll just expand on how I actually think about these important points. So first, I think Islamophobia tends to be generally discussed using the language of fear and insecurity in the media. It is supposedly provoked by the ignorance and mistrust of Muslims and their practices. Such ignorance and mistrust is then presented as generating the discrimination and, in more extreme cases, the violence that Muslim communities presently experience. These extreme forms of violence are then defined as hate crimes, and as such, they are considered to be violations of Canadian and, by extension, Western liberal values of tolerance, multiculturalism, and democratic freedoms. This is the case, of course, only when Islamophobia is actually recognized as a problem in the mainstream media and in mainstream political discourse. And more often than not, it's important to remember it is dismissed as a new ploy of those engaged in political correctness to police the honest beliefs and experiences of ordinary Canadians, ordinary Americans, ordinary British. So what is it that we actually mean when we take up the concept of Islamophobia? And we've had a number of definitions emerge already here. Many Muslim scholars, intellectuals, and activists, however, define Islamophobia certainly as a much more widespread phenomena with very deep historical roots and cultural reach than can be captured in the liberal rubric of discrimination and hate crime. Certainly after a decade and a half of the war on terror, the experience of Muslim communities demonstrates that Islamophobia is now widespread in Canadian political culture and society as it is in other Western societies. I think most of us here tonight would agree that at a minimum, this discourse includes fear and hatred of Muslims. But the treatment of this discourse as extremist has to be questioned, as has to be the construction of violence against Muslims as hate crimes. The depiction of Islam as inherently violent and misogynist is far too commonplace, as is the view that it is a religion which promotes violence and the hatred of women. Such representation of Islam, therefore, cannot be considered as confined only to extremist viewpoints. Indeed, much public discourse, as well as the perspective of committed activists on the left, share these views of Islam. The view that Islam is an essentially pre-modern and irrational creed that instigates the destruction of harmonious coexistence and egalitarian social values is shared on the right as well as on the left, amongst liberals as well as among socialists, among neoconservatives as well as among feminists. My first argument this evening, then, is that while taking up the hate crime aspects of Islamophobia are critically important, so too is taking up the widespread denigration of Islam and Muslims as inherently patriarchal, anti-women, and as integrally opposed to reason and thus prone to violence. Having said this, it is important to note that Islamophobic constructs promote no serious consideration of or engagement with Islam on its own terms. This, I think, is a very, very important point for us to understand. This discourse also does not allow engagement with the specificities of the histories of Islam and the actual practices of communities who actually come together in the name of Islam. Instead, Islamophobic constructs ride on crudely dehistoricized and decontextualized accounts of Islam as well as Muslim societies. They refuse to engage what Islam has meant to Muslims historically, politically, culturally, or with the complex and heterogeneous communities and cultures that have constructed themselves under the name Muslim. And if we actually look at who it is that is targeted by Islamophobic violence, we find that it is not just Muslims, but also those who look like Muslims. And I think both Uruba and Itrat have made this point very forcefully. Who is it then that looks like a Muslim? We know that indigenous peoples, Sikhs, Hindus, Brazilians, among others, have been attacked and even killed as Muslims. In other words, it is black and brown bodies who look like Muslims. So I think it's really important, as Itrat said, that we recognize Islamophobia as a racialized discourse. And, I want to make a point when we talk about racialized discourses that Muslims tend to be defined as Arabs and South Asians largely in mainstream discussions. We tend to erase the fact that Islam came to the Americas with the first Europeans who came here, that Islam has been a major practice that has been indigenized by black people in the United States who came and who were brought over as slaves. So Islam has a very long history in this continent that predates the coming of Arabs and South Asians and other Muslims onto these territories. So I think it's really important when we talk about the racialization of Islam that Islam has been a central aspect of black resistance against slavery for centuries now. And often we tend to forget that black Muslims have the longest history in this part of the world of actually a lived experience of Islam as resistance. So I want to make that point really strongly because it's amazing to me how often, even when we talk about race and racialization, the long history of black Muslims gets erased in the discussion. So it is brown and black bodies, those who look like Muslims, that are targeted by Islamophobia. Islamophobia thus reflects a nexus of religion and race, entangling both and redefining both, so that Muslim is today understood and treated as a racial, not just a religious category. My argument is that both our understanding of religion and race become transformed in this nexus that is represented in Islamophobic discourse. Islamophobia can thus certainly be defined as articulating a politics of race and a form of racial hatred, even as it is a redefining of the meaning of Islam and of what it means to be Muslim. This discourse is therefore much more than individual acts of discrimination and violence. Islamophobia also presently functions as the geopolitical lingua franca, which brings me to my second point, that of the connection between Islamophobia, media, and the politics of contemporary governance. Media is certainly among the foremost institutions that have made Islamophobia pervasive in society, that have helped legitimize this discourse as a perfectly reasonable and understandable response to the threatening presence of Islam and Muslims in Western societies. But the Islamophobia disseminated in and by the media is also the same Islamophobia that informs state policy, that underwrites the national and transnational alliances and allegiances that are being formed among and between states and their nations. This discourse also informs the international accords, the treaties that are presently being signed, and the aid negotiations that are being consolidated, the intelligence, security, immigration, and border control agreements that are being implemented, and the assassination squads, drone wars, and occupations that are being deployed around the world by the most powerful imperialist states. Islamophobia, then, I argue, is the ideological basis today for stabilizing the hyper-capitalist Western nation-state as the singular model for the future of humanity, and it is these politics that are shaping and being shaped by media representations of Islam and Muslims. Moreover, we cannot ignore how Islamophobia has enabled the integration of left, feminist, and queer politics into the imperialism of the 21st century. For these movements and the alternate media they have produced often tend to share the mainstream media's constructs of Islam and Muslims. In my view, challenging Islamophobia in the media is thus to challenge the ideological basis of late capitalism and the workings of its key institutions, which certainly includes the media, but is not limited to the media. Confronting Islamophobia is thus not only to stand up to discrimination against Muslims, it is to confront the ruling ideology of late capitalism. This is a point that is not often well received among left activist circles or within left alternate media. My final point this evening is that in combating Islamophobia, one of the foremost considerations has to be how to build alliances and solidarities with the Muslim communities and their organizations and representatives that are the actual target of the violence. Islamophobia as state policy has been very effective in isolating Muslim communities, in setting them apart in social and cultural as well as political terms. Unfortunately, this often includes being set apart by and within social movement organizing as well. The post-9/11 anti-terrorism measures have been very effective in targeting Muslims, but they have also targeted those who are seen as aiding and abetting Muslims and their community organizations. With the definition of terrorism being so nebulous in legalistic terms, as is also the case with the terms aiding and abetting, these terms have put a chill on non-Muslims who might have otherwise supported and built alliances with Muslim communities. Challenging Islamophobia thus requires breaking through this social, political, and cultural isolation of Muslim communities. It requires actively engaging with these communities and with their organizations. Islamophobia thus has to be confronted as ideology and as practice, which requires also self-reflexivity among the activist movements that have presently been largely persuaded by the popular demonizations of Islam and Muslims and their practices. Thank you.